So if you're searching for land, you may find a great deal on a piece of land, but it requires access to the land through either a stream, a creek, or a river. So should you say no to that because of that access issue? Let's get into it. So how common of an issue is this? Well, in Appalachia or in any mountainous area where you don't have these flat parcels that can have multiple access points if there's a county road, with this topography, you see where a lot of the county roads will follow the stream of that specific watershed. Our example here is a perfect example of that. This is the main watershed that comes down the valley. The county road is just behind you guys up on the hill. And this actually, where I'm standing, used to be the old county road. It used to come down, and actually, instead of crossing the creek, it drove through the creek for a while, almost about 400 yards before it came out on the other side of this edge of the mountain that we're at. So it's pretty common to see that roads and creeks will parallel one another. But as you can imagine, with the county road on one side of the creek, all the parcels to that side have direct county road access. The parcels to the other side, of course, only have access if you can cross that tributary. So most of us looking for land for rural living, homesteading, farming, that type of thing, usually want undeveloped land, raw land, because that helps keep the prices down, and that gives you that blank canvas to do whatever you want with the land. But when you run into something like this, then raw undeveloped land means most likely there's no bridge or culvert or engineered way to cross that creek. So in our example here, when we bought this land 24 years ago, this creek crossing was already established because the old farmhouse used to sit right here. Now, it was in total disrepair, and if you follow the channel for a while, you know that story. But this creek crossing was already established, so there was a cut that was already in place. But this property, for all the years it has been farmed and lived on, it never at one time had a bridge or a culvert crossing. It was always just utilizing the creek crossing. It doesn't look like much right now because we're right in the middle of a drought. So it's rare that I can stand here in hiking boots and not be wet, even in the middle of August. But because of the drought, of course, not a big deal. But that is not the norm. Creek crossings with any type of water, there's a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration. So if you find a parcel of land that the only access requires you to cross a creek, stream, or river, should you say no and totally rule it out? I would say no, not necessarily, but you definitely need to make some considerations as to what you're going to do to manage access across that tributary. So let's go into some options that you have there and the pros and cons of each. Well, the most reliable option, of course, would be to build a bridge, but that bridge is going to require a lot of engineering, depending on the size of the tributary you're trying to cross. It would also cost a lot of money. You also have to worry about building a bridge strong enough to handle weight of heavier vehicles. You may think, well, I just have passenger vehicles. That bridge can be XYZ and it's no big deal. But if you're building a house or you're building a farm or a homestead, there'll be times you may need a concrete truck, or you may need a lumber truck here. You may need a log truck to be able to take logs out if you're doing that for revenue. So you have to build for the worst case scenario when it comes to weight. Another issue, which isn't as bad for a bridge, but is erosion management. When water gets up high here and comes ripping down this valley, if there's bridge abutments, or depending on the span, you may even have center piers, then you have to worry about the water eating out from under those structures and causing structural failure. Bridges by far are the most expensive option to cross a stream. Now, whether you're crossing a small 10-foot stream, 10-foot wide stream like ours, or you've got a major river to cross, that could be a total game changer in your budget. So I want to do a quick shout out to this week's video sponsor, and that's London Shine. They sent me the smallest Kamado Grill in the world. So this thing is obviously very compact. It's perfect for a smaller setting, patio, back porch, something small. But here with a family of four, it's a little small, but obviously that family of four is changing for us. So for Kelly and I, it's perfect size. We've already grilled pork chops and bratwursts on that. But with these Kamados, if you know anything about the Kamados, the way they have all the, the ceramic elements and the insulation and the heat retention, then you can bake bread in them. You can do a tiny little pizza, single serve pizza in that. All kinds of options there. So we're going to do burgers tonight on this. And it's perfect size to just grill up 3 or 4 burgers. So this is a lump coal grill. So all the lump coal that I make down at my crucible, I've got some paper in there for starter, but just put my lump coal in here. And then I just have some scrap craft paper back in here so I can use that to light. So it has vents you can close down if you need to close it off. Control your airflow, of course, which allows you to do temperature control. Same with the top, spring-loaded lid. As it closes down, you can open up your air port to let a little bit of air in, or you can roll the whole thing back if you need to really get it rolling, which is the situation we want. We want to get that chimney effect going. So a second option would be to put in a culvert. And a culvert are usually cheaper than a bridge, usually much cheaper than a bridge, and require less engineering most of the time. But they have their concerns. So this culvert here is, we're about a third of the way back up our valley, just above where we keep our pigs. This is a 5-foot corrugated culvert that we put in place. And actually the original intent of this was to put it down at our creek crossing. It lasted for about a month there before high water washed it out. So we decided to bring it up here and put it in the smaller tributary, the main stream that flows through Red Toolhouse. And that allows us to improve our road so we don't have to drive through a stream or have to worry about washouts here. So it has value. But you can see it needs some improvements. I need to come in here because of the way the creek comes right down behind you guys. There's a big rock outcrop that comes right down here in front of us. Well, that rock is forcing the water to come around and it's snaking against this fill. So this needs to be either rip-wrapped, or if I was really getting froggy, I would pour a wing wall of concrete that the water would be able to crash against and not do erosion and whip around. And you see with a culvert, you always have the chance for debris to come in and start damming things up, thus reducing the amount of flow through a culvert. So one of the biggest issues with culverts that may eliminate them as an option is that you can only culvert so wide a creek. If we're dealing with the typical round corrugated culverts, not concrete box culverts like the state uses, that's a whole other thing. If we're dealing with round culverts, then you just imagine the bigger or the wider you need to get the culvert to be for the creek crossing, then the taller it is. And you either dig down and have to recess that culvert a lot, or it just gets to the point where the creek is just way too wide. And you'll see sometimes people will double up their culverts. They'll put 2 side by side or 3 side by side. And that works, but it really becomes a challenge when you have a high water event, because the force that's meeting where those round culverts have come together, you get a lot of log jams, you get issues like that can cause some serious problems with backing up water or blasting out the culverts because there's just too much force of weight pushing against it downstream. Another issue with culverts, especially these metal corrugated culverts, is that they rot out at the bottom. And it's not because they're rusting, it's because all of the abrasion of debris, so sand and gravel that gets washed down through it constantly, it eventually eats it out. The little culvert that's under our driveway going up to the house, it's already eaten out of the 6 o'clock position. It's completely gone for that whole 40 feet. And they now make plastic culverts that can handle that a lot better. And that's a tip to throw out at you. If you can afford it, look at the plastic culverts. They don't make them as large as you can get the metal corrugated, but the plastic ones usually are smooth-walled on the inside. And the neat thing about that is a smooth-walled culvert, the same diameter as a corrugated culvert, can move 30% more water because of the smooth walls interior. These ribbed corrugations just create so much water turbulence that it backs water up. Now the last option would just to go old school like we have here and just deal with a creek crossing. We've had this creek crossing, we've managed it for 24 years now, and it hasn't been a major issue. Now, Kelly would argue with me a little bit that she thinks it's more of an issue than I think it is. But with this, it's fairly inexpensive, but there still are expenses associated with it, and maintenance is much more ongoing than it would be for our other options. For this, you have to have a good base established, and we were able to maintain and establish a good base because when we had the property timbered right when we bought it, they brought in tons and tons of stone here, big heavy stone, so their trucks wouldn't get caught up in the mud, and that allowed them to compact that crossing quite a bit. And even with a good established base, depending on the amount of high water events you have and the velocity of movement of that water, the more relief you have, the faster that water is going to be moving, then the more that base could be washed out. Normally, you can see right here, normally I'd be standing about ankle deep water in a regular season. And as the water, when we have a flood event, when the water comes down, it hits this paulownia and the sycamore tree right beside you guys and creates a big stir. So what happens is I've seen water as high as here get a lot of silt and debris in it. So sand and detritus and all that easily move stuff, no big rocks usually, all get washed in here and cover up my base. So that's another one of those cost issues, is I have to have my tractor with a box blade to come down here and clean this up. I've done that just recently, and even help with the angle of egress out of the creek crossing so bumpers don't drag, that type of stuff. So it requires regular maintenance, and we get into spring rains or early winter rains, then I could be down here weekly dressing this up. So you're looking at the cost of material with gravel, and of course you're looking at the cost of equipment to maintain this. So an old school creek crossing isn't maintenance free or cost free by any means. Another con with the creek crossing is, of course, when we have a high water event, you could find yourself spending a lot of time either trapped on the property or trapped off the property. When the water's up, you guys are on the county roadside, so if you needed to go out and get to work, not a problem. If you're here where the side-by-side is, then it's a problem. And high water events are nothing to sneeze at. Even this small little stream, you could damage your vehicle, or you could find yourself in a life-threatening situation because there's a lot of water that comes out of here, and when it does, that's a lot of force. It could move a car easily. So along that same line with a high water event, there's a tip for you. If you're considering going old school, then you have to take into consideration how far up or down the watershed you are. In our situation, we're kind of far up. The watershed that comes out of this valley is a starting point. That's our valley. And then the next valley over, which would be the main line of the watershed, it's only 2 other farms. So it's less than 2 miles where the watershed starts. The reason why that's a big deal is when water gets up, it gets up high fast, but it goes down fast. Because we're at the top of the watershed, it drains out quickly. If you're looking at property, look to see where the watersheds go upstream, how far you're looking, because you may have a high water event that could take a day or 2 to get down. So whereas I may wait an hour or an hour and a half for the water to recede to be able to cross one way or the other, further down the watershed, you may be waiting a day to be able to get across, which could be a total deal breaker, especially if you have a 9-to-5 job. So if you found a piece of land that you're really interested in and it has this access across a tributary, be sure to do the research on the 100-year and 1,000-year floodplain. And if you want to know what that means, I'll link to a video here that I did several years ago discussing that very thing. And those floodplains are sometimes misrepresented as like, well, this only happens once every 100 years or once every 1,000 years. That's not what those mean. The video gets into detail of that. But you could be looking at a situation where there's a major flood event. You may be standing, like right here, I'm a good 50 feet from the creek crossing, but I could be in a situation where this would be underwater too. So even safe areas where you feel you can park your vehicle through most flood events and it not be an issue, could be an issue for a major flood event. Take in consideration, if you're on the eastern side of the United States, then you are also in hurricane or tropical storm path areas. And we've seen that happen a lot here recently. The most recent one, Hurricane Beryl, came in through Texas and did a lot of damage all the way up to our friends in Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine that got a lot of damage as well. So just because you haven't seen, or the neighbors say, oh, the water hadn't gotten up in the past several years here, it'll be fine, take into consideration that a major flood event like that or a major rain event could cause a serious issue, and that could affect your access no matter what choice you use. Another point I want to make, whether it's a bridge, a culvert, or any type of structure you build, a hybrid structure that's a low water bridge, those are other options we didn't get into. But keep in mind, as that water gets up, if that water comes up enough to get in contact with the base of that bridge deck, then that bridge acts as a dam, and it's going to cause more issues. So it's going to cause backing up. The force of the water could tear that bridge away from its attachment points, or the amount of water that then rushes over it can make water spread out, and that swift-moving water, of course, could create a lot of erosion issues. Same with a culvert. Once that culvert capacity has been exceeded, then everything washes over it, it backs up, and then erosion takes place. Another tip to recognize is if you're looking at land, you go to see it, you lay eyes on it, just keep in mind what season you're in and research the seasonality of that area. You know, here in August, if I was selling this land and say, yeah, it's a creek crossing, but it's not that big a deal, people would be like, okay, yeah, it's not that big a deal. You're not even going to get your tires muddy when you cross it. Come back here in January and see what it looks like. And also, make it a point to look at debris lines on the creek banks. And you'll get an idea just within the last year, usually, or 2 years, when you see sticks and debris, and hopefully not a lot of trash, but some trash that's sitting high in the trees, then you know, just in the last year or two, because that stuff usually decays and breaks down, but just in the last year or two, water's been that high. So make sure you look at that and put that in your memory bank there to think, well, the water can get up to here, and I got to cross that, then I need my bridge or my culvert to be much higher. So purchasing land that has access only through a tributary of some type may give you a much, much cheaper per acreage price, or it may give you the opportunity to negotiate a much cheaper price. Not that they necessarily posted it. But it also comes with its challenges. You're going to have to spend money regardless if this is your only way to access the property, and it's going to have to be maintained. Bridges, culverts, low water bridges, creek crossings all require a certain level of maintenance. So make sure you're factoring that into your budget. If you're exploring your homestead dreams, you don't want to buy your property and realize, I can't access it on a regular basis because I can't afford to put the infrastructure in that I need to. Well, I hope this video helps for you all looking at doing land purchases that possibly could have this scenario. And I want to give a quick mention. I haven't plugged this in forever, but we do have a Facebook page with the Red Tool House where we post a lot of our behind-the-scenes stuff, kind of like the daily ongoing things, stuff that isn't covered in our videos. So if you're on Facebook and you want to follow us, there'll be a link below in the description where you can check that out. Don't forget, if you want to come to our homesteading conference in September 13th and 14th, tickets are still available, but we're going to close them out the end of August. So be sure to get your tickets now. If you use our offer code just for our YouTube channel, which is YT2024, you can get $10 off per ticket. Well, drop a comment below and let me know what you guys have experienced when it comes to accessing property via a bridge, a culvert, or a creek crossing. Some of you guys that are a little bit longer in the tooth than I am probably have some really good stories about rural life and trying to cross the creek. Real quick story, I can remember as a kid, my dad taking his Jeep Willys truck through a creek crossing when the water was up. And it freaked me out because water came up through the gear shift boot on the transmission hump in that old Jeep. And I just thought, we're going to sink, we're going to die because water was coming through. Little did I know, there's no way in the world that heavy thing was going to float away. But that water coming in that cab really freaked me out. All right, well, I pray everyone have a great week. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.